This is Colin Liddell, and this is the Shortpod, a brief and succinct podcast commenting on the events and issues of the day. And today it is the 30th of October 2022. My topic today will be the appointment of Britain's first non-white Prime Minister, a truly remarkable event that has astounded the world. Now, it's very natural for many people to see this through a racial lens, and this is in fact how the members of the Conservative Party saw this issue, which is why they were not allowed to have a say by the party leadership. But for the party leadership and the elites to which they are connected, this is much more a question of having the right man for the job, white or not white. In fact, they'd be quite happy to have the right woman for the job. But as we saw, they didn't really think there was anybody suitable among the leading contenders. Now, this all springs from the Boris problem. Now, Boris was immensely popular. He was very popular with the members of the Conservative Party. He was the guy who had actually got Brexit done. And also, he seemed to be very, very popular with the voters. Certainly, he was in 2019. But I think the leaders of the Conservative Party, they realised that Boris was a spent force. He was increasingly becoming a liability. And the reason for that was because in 2019, Boris achieved astounding popularity, not based so much on his personal qualities, which are considerable but limited, but much more on the fact that he was able to attract Brexit supporting Labour voters. Now, this is a very, very temporary effect, because now that Brexit has been done and, so to speak, is out of the way, those red wall voters no longer have an incentive to vote Conservative like they once did. Also, Boris was becoming much more of a kind of Trump-like target, somebody who would polarise the electorate rather than someone who could reach across the aisle to the floating voters. And before they got rid of Boris, they noticed that there had been several by-elections in which Labour and Lib Dem voters had been voting in an extremely tactical way. So this was making things look quite dark for the Conservative Party. So there was definitely a need to freshen up the Conservative brand. They tried to replace Boris. They got rid of him. There was a constant media barrage attacking him for relatively minor infringement of the COVID lockdown rules. They hounded him out of office, rather in the same way that they hounded Jeremy Corbyn out of the leadership of the Labour Party with fake anti-Semitism charges. And so then the stage was set for a replacement. Unfortunately for the elites and the Conservative Party MPs, the membership of the Conservative Party, about 160,000 people, were persuaded to vote for Liz Truss, someone that the elites didn't think was quite good enough. The other candidates that came up in the leadership contest, people like Kemi Badenoch, Penny Mordaunt, etc., none of these people were considered quite good enough. But they thought that Rishi had the right set of skills, the right competency, and he also had the added bonus of being non-white. Now, some people might think that's a drawback, and it might well be a drawback with the British voters. We're yet to see how that plays out. But there's no denying that, race aside, Rishi is probably the most presentable and the most economically savvy of the top Tory candidates. And so they thought that putting him in charge would give them the best shot at staying in power. This is definitely what the markets thought. As soon as Rishi was installed by a coup d'etat of the Conservative Party MPs and Boris was forced to back off, the interest rate on government gilts immediately dropped, and this made British government debt a lot cheaper than it otherwise would be under Liz Truss and Boris Johnson. So there we're seeing the effectiveness of Rishi Sunak immediately demonstrated in the fall of the price of debt. There's also a sense that the leadership of the Conservative Party at the moment is very much a poisoned chalice. The smart money is definitely on the Labour Party winning the next election. Rishi's got a very major uphill struggle to pull the Tories back from their extremely low position in the latest opinion polls, especially as the government will be forced to make rather massive budget cuts. Those are going to prove very, very unpopular. We're also kind of moving into a more inflationary economy for the last, I think, roughly the last 40 years. Credit has been quite cheap, and that's because for the preceding 40 years, inflation had been high enough to gradually evaporate government debt. And so that set the stage for the neoliberal low interest rate economy that we've enjoyed over recent decades. Now we're moving back into a kind of 1940 to 1980 high inflation or higher inflation economy. And that's almost inevitable because governments are unable to cut spending. And so they're forced to rely upon higher inflation to deplete and diminish government debt. And the elites and the leading members of the Conservative Party, they obviously think that Rishi is a better person to manage that. Probably the Labour Party's Keir Starmer more or less represents the same kind of outlook. And so, Rishi and Keir Starmer, basically you can see them as two sides of the same coin. So it's not really that important what happens at the next election. What you'll get is a technocratic leader, somebody who recognizes the new economic paradigm, and somebody who will then suit the interests and the needs of the trans-political elite. In the case of Rishi, the added bonus, like I said earlier, is that he's non-white. This helps to bolster Britain's position in the global economy. In particular, it plays very, very well to India and the Indian population. The Indians have been kind of cock-a-hoop that one of theirs is now in charge of the remnants of the British Empire. And this makes Britain seem very, very sympathetic to India. And it might even help India to align itself with the West. And that could be a little bit of an additional challenge to Putin. Now, with Keir Starmer, there's also some benefits to the trans-political elite. If a Labour government is elected at the next general election, that will help to depress nationalist sentiment in the Celtic fringes. Regions or countries like Scotland and Wales, where secessionist or independence sentiment has been growing in recent years, they will feel better represented if the national government is a Labour government. One of the main reasons why Scottish independence flared up so strongly in the 2010s was because the Conservatives seemed to be increasing their hold on power at Westminster. And so a brief holiday for the Conservative Party, a short period of Labour power in the safe hands of Keir Starmer, not Jeremy Corbyn, has certain advantages to the British establishment. So I think what we're seeing here is that Britain is very much a manipulated democracy. When people vote the wrong way, the elites kind of tap them on the shoulder and rearrange things in a way that suits the elites. And one of the most powerful tools that they have to do this are the gilt markets, the debt markets for UK government debt. If a popularly elected leader, Boris Johnson or Elizabeth Truss, do something that they're not quite happy with, they simply have to hit that particular button and a government can be brought to its knees. And now Keir Starmer, he's going to be probably our next Prime Minister in a couple of years, but he has to more or less behave like Rishi Sunak, because if he does anything differently from Rishi Sunak, if he makes any kind of spending commitments that don't add up, the markets can really push up the interest rates on government debt and force a Labour government to back down. So in conclusion, Britain's very much a managed democracy. It's probably about as democratic as Putin's Russia, to be honest. It might be better managed than Putin's Russia because it at least has a competitive element with their two parties. But it's very much a kind of smoke and mirrors show by the elites. That's what I think recent events have kind of demonstrated rather well. So on that note, over and out.